Good afternoon, good evening to everyone. Again, thank you for joining our session. My name is Anita Dorett, and I'm the Associate Program Director with the Investor Alliance for Human Rights. Let's start just with a few housekeeping matters. So I think you've all seen this before, but just to repeat a few points, all of the attendees are on mute. If you have any questions or comments, please enter them into the chat box. Although we are having breakout sessions today, so please do raise these questions and comments during the breakout session. We are recording the session, which will be made available only to ICCR members and attendees, but if you prefer not to be recorded, please turn off your camera. The best way to, I guess, view this session today is to put your preference to speaker view. And so with that, let's get started. So for those less familiar with us, the Investor Alliance for Human Rights is an initiative of ICCR launched in 2018. Our goal is to provide a collective action platform for responsible investment that is grounded in the respect for people's fundamental human rights. And we use the human rights due diligence framework for this as prescribed by the 2011 UN Guiding Principles for Business and Human Rights. In May this year, the Investor Alliance published the Investor Toolkit on Human Rights, which is designed for asset owners and managers to address risks to people posed by their operations and investments. John, could you put up slide 1, please? Great. So, today's session really is a panelist discussion on investor responsibility. We want to explore the journey that we, as investors and ICCR members, hope to take in embedding investor responsibility to respect human rights into our respective organizations. Each of us are at different points in this journey. Some of us may not have even started this journey, and some of us may be, quite a well way into the process. We would like to hear from you about your challenges, your successes, the issues that you have faced, and to see how the Investor Alliance can provide support to ICCR members along the way. And as you will see from the screen, we have with us a very talented panel of 4 women leaders representing 4 of ICCR's institutional investor members who will tell us more about the journey their organization is on. And we'll come to that later. John, you can take down the slide. So before we jump into the panel, we're just going to spend a few minutes refreshing our knowledge of what investor action on human rights means at an institutional level. And to kick us off, we have the very dashing, with a tie on, Reverend David Schilling, to help put us in the human rights frame of mind.
Thank you so much, Anita. I mean, this is such an important session, and I'm so glad that so many people are participating. This was just underscored, the importance of this topic. I've been going to these, engaging forums of business on business human rights at Coca-Cola in Atlanta for the last 12, 13 years. This morning, it was virtual. And it started out with Michelle Bachelet, the Office of the High Commissioner on Human Rights. And it really underscored why we're doing what we're doing. I mean, initially what she did was just kind of catalog all the issues that have happened within the global economy over time that have been exacerbated by COVID-19. And all the data is very, very disturbing. But then she described this as this escalating suffering globally. And there she really pointed to a range of things that have happened in terms of the communities, not only in the North, in the South, but in the North, of hunger, lack of education, a whole range of issues. And she picked up on her boss, if you will, the UN Secretary General's phrase that he began some months ago, building back better. And she said, absolutely, we are not in a position where we can build back better to the same, the same system that we've created. which has created, not only lack of resilience, but inequality, vulnerability of hundreds of millions of global citizens. And then she really gave what I thought was really an important kind of introduction to this session. She said that, when we're talking about building back better, it sounds so up here. What it is we have to get in the center, the UN Guiding Principles on Business Human Rights and the human rights due diligence process. And that will help drive us towards a kind of a sustainable development goal framework for 2030. And in order to build back better, this has to be central. And then she turned to say, who's responsible? It's international institutions. It's civil society. It's companies. And it's investors that have they have to fulfill their responsibilities to respect human rights. And I think she said then, it is not whether to do human rights due diligence, but to do it effectively. In order to do it effectively, we can't just work with companies around human rights. It's now time, as we try to build back better, and we'll be going to a Nadira session tomorrow that'll really give some content to this. We cannot do that without institutional investors incorporating the very same things we've been asking of companies for a very long time, to adopt a comprehensive, transparent, verifiable human rights policy that then gets implemented through the whole process, institutionally, and then through the cycle of investment. So Michelle Bachelet really understands and puts on us as investor institutions the responsibility to respect human rights. So today's session is really going to get into some of the details with some folks that and have really tackled this. So this is learning, this is pioneering work. It's much easier to talk about companies' responsibility to respect human rights, but we also need to integrate as large investors or small. So I turn it back to you, Anita, to go through this important program.
No, thanks so much, David, for centering us to take up this responsibility. Thank you for that. And with that, John, can you just put up slide 2? Great, thank you. So this is a page that we've actually extracted from the Investor Toolkit. So as you can see in this slide, this is from the Investor Toolkit on Human Rights, and it sets out the framework for investor responsibility at 2 levels, both at the institutional level and at the investment level. And so today, we're just going to talk about and focus on the investor responsibility at an institutional level and what it means for us in our organizations. Next slide, please, John. So listed in this slide are the elements of a human rights risk management process for asset managers and asset owners, operations and business relationships. All of you, many of you will be very familiar with this framework and these elements. We've referred to these elements with the policy, human rights due diligence, these terms in our engagements with our portfolio companies. But have we looked inside into our own organizations, and have we embedded this human rights framework? And how will it guide us and inform us as we operate on a day-to-day basis? So, think about, do we have a human rights policy that is applicable not just to our investment decisions, but also across our whole organizations? Does it apply to, for example, our organization's procurement decisions as it relates to suppliers? Does our senior management or board have accountability for our human rights performance? Who is responsible for implementing human rights due diligence within the organization, and how is this progress monitored? Do we have a grievance mechanism for our employees and our suppliers to raise concerns? This will be just like the same feedback hotlines we talk to our companies about. And is this mechanism as well confidential and protect our own employees against retaliation? Does any of our organizations, have we started to publish a report that provides transparency regarding our efforts to manage human rights risks in our investment portfolios? These are some of the questions that we would like to discuss today with our panelists. But just before that, we're going to have a quick poll question. So John, if you can put up the poll question. This is so that we can get a sense of where we are in our investor journey. I'm hoping that you can see the poll question. The poll question will be visible to those who have accessed this session through online Zoom video, and so those who are not, or who are on the phone, may not have a chance to answer it. So I'll just read out the question. What is the most important step that your organization needs to take to embrace human rights responsibility at the institutional level? Some of the responses are implementing an organization-wide human rights policy, adopting responsibility for human rights at a senior leadership level, the need for capacity building amongst staff members, or really just not very sure, or it's maybe some people feel that it's not applicable to their organization. So we're still having some of the answers coming in. So just give us a few seconds. And I think what we're seeing from the poll really is that we feel the strong sort of favorite in terms of the most important step to take is about building capacity for staff. So that has 40% of the votes. And then it's kind of split amongst the other options, some saying that they're not sure and some feeling that this is not applicable as yet. So that's great, and thank you for sharing this. Let's continue with our session, although I've just very quickly shared with you the results of the poll. Okay, with that, I'm going to kind of kick off and start our panel discussion today. So whilst our panelist needs no introduction, I'm just going to quickly just share with you our four panelists today. We have Danielle Essink, Director at Robeco Active Ownership Department. She's calling in from the Netherlands, and it's way past 9 o'clock in the hour. So thank you so much for joining us, Daniella. We have Cory Klemmer, who is the Director of Engagement at Dominique Impact Investment. Rosa van de Beemt, Vice President and Responsible Investment Analyst at BMO Global Asset Management, and Kate Monahan, Shareholder Engagement Manager at Friends Fiduciary Corporation. Thanks to you guys for joining, or to you gals for joining this session today. John, you can get, we don't need the slide, yes. So it's great to have all of you here. And I'm going to just kick us off because, time is tight. And I want each of you to take 2 to 3 minutes to share with us where your organization is in designing and implementing a human rights framework, highlighting some of the elements that we spoke to earlier, sharing some of the biggest challenges and successes along the way. And just before you answer this question, if you can please tell us just a little bit about the size of your investment institution in terms of number of employees or number of assets that you have under management, as this will give our participants more context to your experience and also enable them to identify with an organization that is similar to them. So with that, Rosa, would you like to kick us off? Are you able to unmute yourself, Rosa? No. John, could you unmute? Yeah, great, thanks.
Thanks so much. Yes, I'm so happy to be here today. Thank you for the generous introductions, Anita. Just a little bit about BMO Global Asset Management. We are the asset management arm of the BMO Financial Group, also known as the Bank of Montreal. Our headquarters are in Canada, but we have offices around the world, including in the US, mostly in Chicago, and in Europe. And in terms of size, I would say the enterprise is quite big. I don't even know how many employees we have, but in terms of assets under management of BMO Global Asset Management, we have about 340 billion Canadian dollars. And then we also have assets under advice. That's about 250 billion Canadian dollars. And that is for the service we offer to institutional investors on engagement and voting on their behalf. And just a note on where we are at in terms of implementing a human rights framework. Obviously, we have, the enterprise level, so the entire company, which is a public company. So I would say, the expectations for us to have a robust framework is quite high. So at the enterprise level, we have a human rights policy, which clearly adheres to the UN guiding principles for business and human rights. And it also incorporates asset management as an element. This policy is signed off by board of directors, as well as some of the executives who are responsible for the asset management arm. And then I would say human rights is also an annual component of our materiality assessment, material risk assessment as a broader company. The policy does also cover things like responsible procurement, etc. And I think, at the asset management level, we have done a lot of engagement on human rights historically. And, we always look at the highest risks in terms of controversies across our portfolios, but the actual governance side of who within the asset management arm is responsible for human rights oversight is something that we are currently really working on. The team that I work with, the responsible investment team, is a team of around 20 people, and we're mostly responsible for engagement and ESG integration and proxy voting. And a lot of the human rights work has sat with us historically. And so we're now working to kind of change that and bringing in some other departments within our division, which is both a challenge as well as a great opportunity for more people to both get involved and to become more knowledgeable about how we can implement human rights into the investment process. And I'll stop there for now.
Okay, no, thanks so much. Kate, do you want to maybe have a go next? Okay, John, could you unmute her, please? Thanks.
Okay, I think that should be good.
Yes.
Great. Thank you to Anita for having me, and excited for the panel. But so just to give people background on Friends Fiduciary, we are a nonprofit, faith-based, socially responsible investment firm, and we serve Quaker organizations across the United States. And we manage about $500 million on behalf of over 400 Quaker meetings and schools and retirement communities and other Quaker institutions. And just as some context, because Quakers have no hierarchy, we're not a part of a larger body. So we make our investment decisions and our screening decisions on our own. And we're a manager of managers. So we have that interaction as well. And we've grown pretty significantly over the past decade or so. We've added 3 new staff members, including myself. And we're now a staff of 9. And so for me, what I do is, obviously as shareholder engagement manager, I'm setting and implementing our engagement strategy, but I also work really closely with our executive director and our CIO and our investment analyst and the investment committee of our board to really reflect the learnings from our engagements, and also to reflect our Quaker values in our investment process. So in terms of where we are in the process of designing and implementing a human rights framework, we've considered the human rights performance of companies in our screening process for a long time. I was trying to find out how long and I couldn't, but certainly since I've been here. I think we name explicitly human rights and labor rights in our investment policy. And we have, because we have separately managed accounts, we have, you know, full control. Every time a manager proposes a name for addition to our portfolio, our staff and our investment committee examine that company's ESG record, you know, for consistency with our Quaker values before approving it or denying it. But I would say over the past several years, as we've grown, we've begun to add more formal and specific statements regarding human rights to our investment policy. But we still have obviously work to do in drafting sort of a robust human rights policy that applies to both our operations and our investments. And that would serve as a basis for maybe those more specific policies, and sort of would codify what we're already doing and consider all aspects of human rights and their ramifications and our responsibility as values-based investors. And I think, you know, we think that it's important to publicly codify that commitment, because I think obviously we want to, you know, fully live and incorporate our values, but we also want the accountability of stating our policy and beliefs so that our constituents can hold us accountable. And also, you know, we've been growing and evolving as an organization, and so moving towards a more formal policy structure seems like a natural part of that evolution. And I think also having an explicit policy that's tied to international frameworks kind of joins us to this larger investor community that's starting to begin to address those issues, and we can sort of add our institutional log to the human rights fire, for lack of a better metaphor. And I think also that if we're engaging companies on human rights, and we've been doing that for several years as well. So sort of a, you know, if we're asking companies to do this, then we should model that and have made those commitments ourselves, you know, that we're asking them to make. And so I think, you know, obviously as a smaller organization, it can be tough to create the time and the space to do the policy work as opposed to our engagement and our other work. And we don't always have the capacity to do everything we'd like to do. So we're really reliant on ICCR and IAHR and resources like the Investor Toolkit and learning from peers in our panels like these. Because I think the more that we collaborate, the more effective we can all be in making these policies meaningful. Thanks.
So much, Kate. That was really very insightful. And I think a lot of what you said may resonate with a number of our ICCR members. So thank you for sharing that. And, you know, knowing that, you know, you're on your way in that journey, which I think it will be a continuous journey in any case. We'll move to Daniella next, and then Cory straight after that. So Daniella, thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Anita. Thanks so much for organizing this panel, and also for the kind invitation for me to join tonight. So I work in Robeco, as you mentioned already, which is a mid-sized international asset manager. You already mentioned we're in the Netherlands, in Europe. That's where our headquarters is, but we also have an office, for example, in New York. We have around 850 staff, so we're definitely pretty large, but I think in the world of asset management, that is also pretty small in a way. And we manage around 175 billion US dollars assets under management. For me personally, I have a dual role in Robeco. About half of my time, I work as a human rights specialist in Robeco's active ownership team. So where I really engage companies on human rights. We have about 15 people dedicated to that work. And my focus is mainly on the tech sector and human rights. As many of you on the line maybe already know, this is really my passion. But I also have another passion that maybe people don't know about, which is that I also coordinate our internal efforts on sustainability. So really, what are we doing in our own operations? So I take about 2 days a week for that. And really ensuring, and I think Cory pointed it out very well, or I'm saying Kate, sorry. Kate pointed out very well, to say that you really need to walk the talk. You need to be consistent in what you do with the companies, but also implement that yourself. So that's really what we're trying to do, but it's quite challenging because a lot of attention goes to the investment side. This is where we have the biggest impact, but we also need to make sure that what we ask the investee companies to do, that we actually also live up to that expectation ourselves. Where we are in the journey, really, some basic things we have put in place. They're not perfect yet, but we have a policy on human rights that covers both our investments, our employees, purchasing, and our clients, or how we want to treat them, including like privacy considerations. We're really in the process of updating that, and we're using the Investor Toolkit. It's really, well, it's not easy to use maybe, just to put that on the table. But it's very comprehensive and it does give a lot of guidance. But it's not a quick fix. You cannot do it in 1 or 2 hours. So it's for us a small project internally. And what we really need to do is further formalizing. And I think Rosa was saying something similar, really formalizing the responsibility for the implementation, which has now really been with me and a few colleagues in the active ownership team, but we need to have that more at the top level and also further down in the organization. In Europe, we have to deal with the EU Sustainable Finance Plan, which is giving us a lot of things to do on the due diligence side. So we're definitely also working a lot on that, which is now mainly based on controversies. So we are dependent on a data provider that I want to share some thoughts on later in the panel. That screen actually the controversies that we then use to also highlight those in our portfolios. But that's not good enough for this new upcoming EU legislation. So we have quite some work to do there. And maybe one thought when somebody mentioned, or the poll mentioned, supporting staff and learning. I think for us, that's also really an important angle and a continuous journey to really inform investment analysts and portfolio managers that are really used to think about business risk and not risk to people. So that's a continuous journey and, well, I think also a challenge that I kindly take on and really would like to bring our organization further on. I'll stop there for now.
Great, thanks. Cory, are you able to unmute yourself? Yeah, yep. Great. Thanks, Cory.
Hi. Thank you for having me. It's so great to join this panel. It's always fun to be on an all-female panel. So Dominique is a woman-led small investment manager. We have a family of mutual funds. The staff is like probably a little under 30 people, and we manage about $2 billion. So we're much more on Kate's side of the spectrum here, where it's hard to think about our human rights impact outside of our investment process because so much of our impact will come from our investments. And on the investment side, we have a long-standing policy. We do a ton of reporting about it. We endorse the UN guiding principles. I think probably my predecessor and colleagues were very involved in developing the guiding principles a decade ago. And we've advocated for companies to adopt them very loudly. And it's built into, we have our standards that govern a lot of our work. It's overseen by our standards committee, which is comprised of senior leadership in our company. And that guides all of our work, and it is implemented across all of our departments, mostly through research, through the investment process, and then also through my work engagement. And so that, I think, kind of checks a lot of these boxes, but it is focused on the investment process. And in thinking about how we do this at the institutional level, I actually was in the process of developing our racial justice action plan when this panel came up, and I realized I was really developing an internal human rights policy because it's something that we would establish to cover the whole firm and our internal operations. It would affect issues like procurement, like hiring. It would drive training, and it's still in development, but what we're thinking about is a high-level set of principles and policies that will be overseen and owned by senior leadership and get implemented throughout all of the stuff we do. And it'll lead to due diligence on things that are outside of our investment process, like procurement. And so I think that racial justice, I see a question in the chat already about how does a small asset owner do this when you don't really have a large operation. And I think this is one area where it actually makes a lot of sense. And we're looking at maybe there's a way to set up a grievance mechanism through a third party, but so that we can really roll this out in a robust way, and meet all of the guidance from the investor toolkit as part of our racial justice policy. And then I think that could grow over time into something else. But I think probably racial justice is the most likely place where we would have a direct human rights impact in our operations, though it is a learning process, and so lots of potential for this to still unfold.
No, and thanks so much for that, Cory. I mean, that's really great insight into how You know, an issue that we're all sort of addressing through our investments and at a global level is also being brought internal, and that is really what, you know, we're talking about in this discussion. And so with that, you know, picking up from that, you know, I wanted to ask the panelists, how does embedding the responsibility to respect human rights at an institutional level actually support your responsibility at an investment level? And, you know, and I think that, you know, Kate alluded to it, and all of you have alluded to that in your discussion. And, you know, to make it real to our audience, maybe you can give an example of something that has happened at institution level that actually feeds and supports the investment level. And I'm going to throw it to Daniella first. And I know that Daniella, you mentioned it earlier, the context of how we work with a supplier like a data provider, and how that can also help to influence or how that's integral to investment decisions as well.
Yeah, thanks, Anita, and happy to share an example and to think how you can work with these principles and this guidance to do whatever you can do, right? I think that's important, and that maybe also alludes a little bit to the question of what can a small asset owner do. I think for me, it's really about understanding where you can have leverage, where you can play a role in making sure that human rights are embedded in a better way. And one example that we use, but it's not necessarily the example for everybody. So it can also be, for example, asking your asset manager specific questions. Maybe if you hear me or Rosa say something, thinking, okay, this can really be something that I can ask other asset managers also about. But for us, I think one of the things that we have noticed that actually data providers are quite powerful in our sector. They quite have a lot of power in our sector. Especially smaller asset managers and asset owners tend to use them and not have the capacity to do a lot of their own research. So that means if a company has a controversy level that is really high, most likely it will not end up in a portfolio. But what if there are concerns, for example, raised by civil society organizations or that you see in the media, and the controversy level is really not very high. So apparently, according to the data provider, there is not a real issue. That's where we really engage our suppliers and our data providers, really to challenge them a little bit, but also to learn how they assess things, but also definitely also to challenge them to think about how well their process is around embedding these human rights risks into their controversy levels. Because, for example, internally with us, if it has a high controversy level, it would mean that we have specific capacity to do engagement with these companies or to exclude them potentially. But if it's a very low level, that would mean that people would think I'm wasting my time on this company. But sometimes there can be really severe issues raised by civil society or other media that I'm really concerned about and that I would like to see reflected. And I know when they reflect it, it is also reflected for all of their other clients. So in a way, that is actually quite a good tipping point to be working around.
Right. No, thanks for that, Daniella. I'm happy for any of the panelists to take this, you know, to share an example. Maybe I'll just ask Rosa.
Yes, thank you. I think maybe responding to what Daniella was mentioning, an example for us recently was that there was a company that was implicated quite severely in some human rights risks in the supply chain. And I think it was modern slavery in the supply chain. And because our responsible funds had a really robust you know, screening mechanism in place. This was a company that was not included in our responsible funds. However, it was not explicitly, you know, perhaps flagged or excluded from our regular funds. And so the question then became, well, whose responsibility is it to both do that screening across all of the funds and follow up? And, you know, it's our team's responsibility to engage a company. At this point, we didn't own the company at all, except I think for in a small ETF. So it was more of a passive holding. But it was just the sort of shock to realize, hey, if there is nobody that is at the mid-level responsible, you know, so it's the analyst doing the work, then there's like the higher human rights policy that we have, but there is something missing in between. And so that actually helped us internally to make the case for the need for more robust governance and oversight.
Great. Cory?
Yeah, I think just to come back to the racial justice example, because I think it's helpful. It's a helpful way to think about where our institution is implicated rather than just our investments. I definitely think just as a foundational thing, alignment is really important. And if you're asking a company to do something that you don't do yourself, it just sets up a less than ideal dialogue. And it, you know, when you're going through, like we've just gone through our own TCFD reporting, and it makes our conversations with other companies about TCFD reporting very different, and I think much more productive and useful. Likewise, I think doing our own racial justice kind of policy like this, you know, the principles, the governance mechanism, and the due diligence and the training and all of that, you can see how not only might that surface issues where we could maybe just do better on, say, our procurement contracts, but also it means that if we're committed to the training, it means that we'll have, you know, when we update our KPIs, we're going to have a better trained staff doing that work, in the research work, in the engagement work. If we've invested in a structure to make sure that we're always shining a light on it, and that we're training folks so that they have the necessary expertise. And I mean, not to like beat a dead horse here, sorry, PETA, I know they've replaced that with something, but you know, not to belabor the point, but I do think racial justice is a great example because there's so much that we don't see. And so when you build in a deliberate structure like what's laid out in the investor toolkit, it means that we're going to shine a light on it and have a structure that is committed to reviewing the issues and integrating them into our work in a way that can show up in our hiring decisions and in our investment decisions and our research and our engagement and across the firm. And I think it is really additive. So yeah, that would be, again, my example.
Thanks, Cory. Kate, I know you
yes. Yeah, I think Cory really, I mean, said it all so well. I think, you know, racial justice is such a good example of like, you know, where at an institutional level, like, you know, it feels very pressing for, you know, a staff of 9 in a way that, you know, there are other kind of more intangible sort of, you know, human rights concerns don't. But I think that, I think too that, I mean, for us as a faith and values-based investor, our investment process is really, like by definition, really responsive to and guided by our values. And I think, you know, one of the benefits of our size is that we're lean and that we're nimble, and you know, the investment and the organizational sides are really, really intertwined. And I think we also have, you know, the advantage of that as a nonprofit organization, we're coming from that sort of mission-based perspective first. But I think it'll be really the answer. I think I don't really have an example because we don't know where that's going to lead us yet, because we haven't necessarily made that institutional commitment yet. We're just starting out there, but I think that we're really looking at this as a journey, and we don't necessarily know where it will lead, but we know that the first step is a policy and a governance commitment. So kind of like Cory said, you know, that we're shining a spotlight on this, and it can kind of show, we have the structure for it to show up wherever it needs to be showing up. And so I think in that sense, to be determined. I also think that, you know, the engaging sort of, to what Daniella was saying, engaging data providers, and also for us engaging managers, I think having a structure in place to do that as well. I mean, we already have a structure, but having one that incorporates human rights commitment will be good. So I'll leave it there.
Well, with that great, you know, with that great discussion, let's open up the discussion to really all our other attendees. And so what we're going to do is we're going to go into our breakout rooms now. John, could you put up slide 4, please? As John's putting up this slide, what we're going to do is we're going to go into 4 breakout rooms, which will be randomly allocated, and each of the panelists will be in one of the panelists will be in each breakout group to really help facilitate the discussion. They'll probably nominate a spokesperson to take down 1 or 2 key points that we hope to have the time to come back and share when we get back to the main session. So we have 4 questions here, but please don't try to answer or discuss all the 4 questions. Just choose 1 or 2 that resonates strongly with you. I'm just going to read out the questions very quickly, and then I'm going to ask John to to start the breakout groups. So the first question: what from the panelist discussion resonated the most with you? What is the biggest challenge for your organization in embedding human rights responsibility at the institutional level? How has your organization articulated your responsibility to protect human rights? And does your senior leadership or board have accountability for your human rights performance? So please just choose 1 or 2 of these questions during the discussion session. We'll probably break out for about, I'd put it at 10 minutes, maybe 9 minutes actually, since we're running out of time, 9 minutes. And then John will pull us all back about 3:51. So John, take it away and thank you. Hi, John. I think people are still coming back. Is that right? All right. I know you're on mute. I'll just wait.
It was too short.
Yeah, it was kind of a little bit of a toss-up between, because I really wanted, I think some of the points that the panelists were raising were really very interesting, and I just didn't want to cut it short. So I'm sorry that this session was very short, but you know, it is one of many conversations that we hope to have as a bigger group, individually, as smaller groups as well. And so as we've got just a few minutes left, I'm just going to see if the spokespersons, I mean, if everybody can go on mute now, then what John will do is then enable the spokesperson of each of the groups to be able to unmute themselves and maybe share with us just one of the points that came out from your discussion. So Kate, I'm going to start with you first. And John, you can take down the slides so that we can kind of see everybody. I'm going to kind of throw it to Laura, because we were in the same group. So Laura, take it away.
Sure, thanks. You know, we really only got to one question, which was the first one, but I think it's an important one. And when we talked about what resonated most, some of the things came up is that, you know, a lot of organizations have maybe scattered policies that could be pieced together to sort of look like a human rights policy, but that's very different than actually having a human rights policy. And so that's something that, you know, we need to work towards. Also, you know, we talked about the racism being a salient issue, and that being one of the biggest things that I think many of us will be looking at when we're looking at that. And then it came up, you know, do you have a policy on you know, race and culture and all that? And you know, I know for our organization, the answer is no. And I'm going to guess for a lot of organizations, that's probably the truth. This Band-Aid that's been ripped off of structural racism in our country has been a real wake-up call. So I think it'll be interesting to see. I think we'll see companies going that direction. I hope so.
Right, Laura, I'm just going to stop right there, Laura, because I'm just going to throw it back out to someone, one of the other groups. But yep, thank you for that. Yep. Who was the spokesperson in Cory's group? If you can just unmute yourself. Is it you?
I was totally derelict. I did not appoint the spokesperson. But I'll just very quickly sum up what I think was one of the key issues that arose, was that a number of folks in the group, their institutions have human rights embedded in their organizations, but not necessarily through the investment process. And it's not structured in the way that the guiding principles lay out. And so how to have the impact at scale when you're a small organization, and it's kind of, you know, if you're faith-based, you're doing this work on so many other fronts. How do you do it how do you have a policy that allows you to have an impact on the financial side as well, was a big question. And I do think that, you know, any work you can do with your fund managers to highlight this as an issue is really additive. But yeah, just this question of how do you have a cohesive policy that covers your whole institution when you already have so much work ongoing on so many different fronts, whether it's, you know, indigenous rights and biodiversity issues, or it's racial justice, or what have you. And so more questions than answers from us.
And that's perfectly fine. We're all on this journey together. Daniella, your group?
Yeah, I think somebody said Frank would volunteer, but I'm not sure if he agrees. So
I'll although my arm was twisted. I'll
sorry
mention
about that.
two things. Number one, we had several women religious sisters in our group who felt pretty comfortable on the feeling that they've embedded human rights and processes within their organization. Less comfortable with how they manage human rights across their investment portfolio. But one kind of good practice mentioned was bringing in investment managers on a rotating basis and really quizzing them on challenging them on how their processes to get a certain comfort level. Of course, in the initial screening of those asset managers, that's an important step. And then Danielle did add that the more questions they receive as an asset manager concerning human rights, first of all, makes it easier for her internally in echoing her message, but also forces the asset managers to institutionalize this and not just have it as a marketing kind of bullet. It's really it's embedded. It starts to be embedded. So the more you ask.
Okay, well, thanks Frank. And Rosa, your spokesperson.
Yes, I also neglected to do my duty and appoint a spokesperson. We had an interesting discussion going on, so I'll just report back on one of the points which Frank actually already raised, which was how really, does the pushing your asset manager as an asset owner fit into the equation, and how it does indeed really help when asset owners are pushing their asset managers on more robust implementation and also on reporting so that you can see what is actually happening under the hood. We also briefly spoke about the fact that in Europe, Share Action has done some comparison of asset managers on how they sort of perform on human rights, whether they have a public policy, what does that look like, do they embed international standards into their policies, etc. What does their engagement work look like? And so that type of more public pressure, as well as the PRI now going to look at incorporating human rights into the survey, is also one of the other drivers. Yeah.
Well, with that, and we're just on the kind of the last 2 minutes. I was just going to throw it back to the panelists and Rosa, since you're on spot. I mean, is there any advice, any just suggestions, following the discussion, which you can offer to this group, to take away with them? So, and then if the other panelists can just jump in with any advice.
Yeah, I think what we've really realized is that very often we are doing a lot of the work already. It's just not formalized in a way that would help us do more of what we're already doing. And so I would say just look at what you currently have. Don't get overwhelmed by everything that is in the investor guide necessarily, because there's a lot in there. Look at what you currently have and see kind of how that maps on to the guidance, and then see where you think is the most pressing gap for your organization as a starting point.
Kate?
Yes, I think for us, I think working in collaboration as like smaller organizations, trying to like maximize our impact through IAHR and ICCR and learning from each other. And I also wanted to highlight Frank's point in the chat. Don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. It's a journey, just get started. That's kind of where we're at, Thanks.
Daniella, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, on a very practical note, there's a one-pager. So just one page with questions asset owners can ask their asset manager. So find that one pager and start there, I would say.
Right, and actually just on that one pager is, I believe it's from the Toolkit, and it's part of the materials that I attach, the pre-readings I attach. And sorry, Frank, I never got to post that, but we'll share it with you guys later. And Cory, to close us off.
No pressure. No, I think I agree with what everyone said. It's, we're all figuring this out as we go. And so, just getting started, everyone in this group is already doing incredible work, whether it's through their investment process, through their engagements, or through their other activities. And so I think building on what you have and collaborating and learning from each other, we can only do better. So it's great opportunity to be with you all today.
Well, thanks to our great panelists. Thanks to the great discussions and all of you for participating and being open and honest with your views. What I want to say is that the Investor Alliance is available to be with you to explore any of the points that you raised today. Stay tuned. We will be looking at putting up more events, maybe smaller workshops as we try to talk these through as opposed to webinars, but stay tuned, and really looking forward to working with all of you. Have a good rest of the conference, and thanks. Bye-bye.